Welcome everyone to another Raid Shadow Legends video. I hope you guys are having a great day today. So today is part 3 of our Hydra Head Clan Boss coverage. We have the Head of Blight. It has 4 abilities. We have Dripping Jaws in A1, Leeching Blight, Blinding Smog, and Almighty Blight as a passive. So let's get to Dripping Jaws. Attacks all enemies, places 3 5% poison debuffs for 2 turns. Also has a 75% chance of placing a leech debuff for 2 turns. And as always, it has a decapitation effect. The decapitation effect is inflicts damage to all heads under HP burn debuffs whenever this head is decapitated. So that sounds like it's going to be a major damage dealer to the other heads. It's going to be something you want to be placing AoE HP burn and making sure it's on all the heads, or maybe a spread debuff or something. Get it on all the heads before you decapitate the Head of Blight. Make sure you pay attention to that. Make sure you're doing massive damage to the rest of the heads. I don't know if it's massive. We have to speculate on that. But, you know, if it's adding this damage multiplier to the game, you want to take advantage of it. So, Leeching Blight attacks all enemies, places a 5% poison debuff for 3 turns, instantly deals damage from all poison debuffs on each enemy under a leech debuff. So, we probably want to either have a block debuffs on our characters before that attack from the A1 Dripping Jaws or Leeching Blight happens, or try to cleanse before Leeching Blight ends up going off. So Blinding Smog places a Poison Cloud buff on all Hydra heads for 2 turns. This buff cannot be removed or transferred on a 5-turn cooldown. So if we really go back to the beginning here and take a look at what Poison Cloud is, it says blocks damage from all hostile poison effects. Additionally, every attack dealt against the Hydra head under this buff counts as a weak hit. HP burn debuffs cancel the effects of Poison Cloud. Champions whose skills mean they do not land weak hits in Affinity Breaker artifact set can counter this effect as well. Poison Cloud cannot be removed, stolen, or otherwise affected by buff manipulation skills. So you're going to want to knock that off as soon as possible. HP burn is the way to do it. Going back to the head. As always, the Almighty Blight passive has a very shared skill set amongst the other Hydra heads and a couple of unique abilities as well. Starting with, this head receives double damage from HP burn debuffs, so you want to make sure this head is getting the HP burn on it at all times. Decreases the damage of all Hydra heads take from AoE attacks by 10%. Damage from skills that scale based on enemy HP or max HP cannot exceed 10% of the head's max HP when attacking this head. Damage taken in 1 tick from HP burn debuffs cannot exceed 40,000 HP. Damage taken from reflected damage, the War Master Mastery, or the Giant Slayer Mastery cannot exceed 50,000 HP per attack. Immune to stun, freeze, sleep, provoke, block active skills, block passive skills, fear, true fear, poison, and petrification debuffs. Also immune to HP exchange effects, HP balancing effects, cooldown increasing effects, and turn meter reduction effects. So it has a lot of immunities here, but as I said before, there's a lot of skills in the game, a lot of debuffs that can land on him, and we want to be applying those at all times probably. Be a good idea. So let's go over it again. It's a poison placing and leech placing Hydra head that also takes extra damage from HP burns and places a Poison Cloud buff on other Hydra heads that also gets removed by using HP burn. So let's go over some of the HP burn characters in the game. Like I said before, you probably want a cleanser, but more importantly, maybe a block debuffs character to go along with them. So as far as HP burn characters go, there's a lot in the game that actually apply an AoE HP burn. Let's go over those characters now. First one on the list is Crypt King Grawl. He has attacks all enemies, has a 75% chance of placing an HP burn debuff for 2 turns. Many of these champions have a similar skill set. 100% chance when booked on a 3-turn cooldown. Elder Skarg is next up on the list, but he has a very specific set of criteria that has to be met for his AoE HP burn to go off. So it says, places a HP burn debuff for 2 turns and a true fear debuff for 1 turn to all enemies. If this attack places all 3 extra hits, and it attacks 1 enemy 3 times, but has the opportunity to place 3 extra hits, depending on how many buffs or debuffs are on the target. So but they need 3 buffs or debuffs on the target to place all 3 extra hits, and then you would get the HP burn. So very specific set of criteria, not just the same old Crypt King Grawl automatic land. Next up is Sssshhhhh Flametongue. He has a 100% chance to land when booked. Erndig is another one that has a very specific set of criteria belonging to his A3 skill. will also place a HP burn debuff for 2 turns after the attack on enemies whose turn meters are below 30%. So attacks one enemy, fully depletes the target's turn meter, and then will also attack all enemies if the first attack is critical, which it should be. So this AoE attack has a 75% chance of placing a 25% weaken debuff for 2 turns, and then the HP burn as well. So that's only going to land on any target with turn meter below 30%, so it's not going to hit everybody all the time, but it can if certain criteria is met. Ignatius is another one that has a 100% chance to land, and this one cannot be resisted, so it's pretty cool. Kyoku is a brand new champion added to the game very recently, and her A2 has a very unique set of skills involved with it, and the language is kind of weird, so let's go over it real quick. Blood Curdle attacks all enemies, has an 80% chance of placing a 50% decreased attack debuff for 2 turns. That's 80% chance, but it's 100% chance when booked. So after attacking, has an 80% chance of placing an HP burn debuff for 2 turns on all enemies that this skill did not place a decreased attack debuff on. Next on the list is Temisia. She's from the Void Legendaries, and she's a very amazing skinwalker. She has Cunning Chaos, attacks all enemies, has a 75% chance of placing HP burn debuff for 3 turns. Has a 75% chance of placing a stun debuff for 1 turn on targets with 50% turn meter or more, and a decreased speed on targets with 50% or less turn meter. Very, very cool. Tyrant Ixlamore has a 100% chance of HP burn. Next up is Venus. She has a 75% chance of placing AoE HP burn, so not a 100% chance when booked, but very cool nonetheless. Alright, I'm not going to include Trunda on the list because her A3 Forge Rhythm basically only places the HP burn debuff if the enemy is under a stun debuff, and since all the Hydra heads are immune to stun, it's not going to be very effective at all. So, places an extra hit on enemies not under stun debuffs. Most people build their Trundas to be pure damage. They don't even try to land the stun or the HP burn. So I'm not going to include Trunda on the list for this reason. She's not going to be effective at landing the HP burn. She's useless in this category. So we got to add Achak the Winder into the list. He has a very unreliable HP burn, or I guess you could say it's reliable, but it's based off certain criteria again. Has a 70% chance of placing an HP burn debuff for 1 turn on enemies whose defense is equal to or higher than their attack. So it's only going to land like defensive type champions, which a lot of times in games is going to be landing the freeze version over here on the characters that have higher attack than defense. So not a reliable source. I'm not sure exactly how the Hydra stats will play out, but he is on the list. If you've had the opportunity to earn Akoth the Seared, you can also use him. He has a weird A2 Pyroclasm. Attacks all enemies, has a 20% chance of placing an HP burn debuff for 2 turns. Chance of placing the debuff increases by 20% for each alive enemy. So I guess against the Hydra heads, it's probably going to be like 100%. Kind of unique. Everyone's favorite starter champion. No, I'm just kidding. You know it's Kale. But Ultimate Gaelic gets an upgrade to the Gaelic. So he has a unique HP burn skill, which relies upon him having an increased attack buff on him. So make sure if you bring him to the fight, you also bring someone to increase his attack, which I'm sure you already know and do. Last on the list is Mordecai. Mordecai has a 100% chance of placing HP burn debuff on all enemies for 2 turns and an increased attack buff for 3 turns. So that's all the champions in the game that can actually put an HP AoE burn on the Hydra heads. There's actually a lot of champs in the game that have a single target HP burn. I'm not going to go over all of those, but if you're struggling to find an HP AoE burn champ on your team, nothing like adding a single target one, and then maybe you could use a debuff spreader or something, get creative, try to get the AoE HP burn on all the Hydra heads at all the times. So Head of Blight can be taken fully advantage of. Maybe I'll go over that in another video. We have a combination of single target HP burn with a debuff spread. But for now, that's the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll be coming up with Head of Suffering here next. Hope you guys have a great day, great night, depending where you're at. See you guys in the next video. Peace.